O.R.C.A is a mysterious character. The omniscient recording computer of Alterna, developed by late humanity to record and manage their knowledge and information, is introduced to us relatively early into Splatoon 3's hero mode, when entering the first mission after Agent 3 landed in Alterna. An ominous sequence commences as O.R.C.A was activated, and it revealed its identity and its apparent purpose of guiding us through a series of test chambers. And initially, it was intriguing to think about the potential this character might have throughout the story. Unfortunately, aside from guiding us and providing the information in the Alterna logs, O.R.C.A did not seem to play any substantial role in the story later on, which made you wonder why O.R.C.A was even conducting these tests in the first place. So we are being left to speculate. What were O.R.C.A's true intentions? The only concrete information we have about O.R.C.A is the last paragraph of the second Alterna log and the introduction sequence I mentioned earlier, in which O.R.C.A did state it is a navigation system for Alterna citizens and that it was designed to measure your abilities by completing missions in Alterna. Which, if you think about it, is already inconsistent with the fact that in the log, it was described how O.R.C.A was supposed to record human knowledge. So, to put these things into perspective, we'll first have to think about what O.R.C.A actually is. By that I mean, is O.R.C.A a sentient AI like Todor, or is it a literal computer? Just a program that's been running for ages? Because this is the impression that O.R.C.A initially gives you in its introduction. While Todor had a clear goal for which it made sense that it constructed these tests for its subjects to go through, for O.R.C.A, there doesn't seem to be any reason to conduct these tests on random Inklings and Octolings that land in Alterna, which would imply that O.R.C.A is just a non-sentient program that is automated to register people for a testing program that has been going on since humans were still around. However, I have difficulties imagining that humans would let themselves be tested by a computer like this. And even if they did, it wouldn't be an answer for what has been bothering me the most with O.R.C.A. How and why would the computer set up missions made for ink weapons? The fact that these tests were created specifically for the abilities of Inklings and Octolings would suggest that it must have been a conscious decision by O.R.C.A to somehow procure the ink mechanisms to design these missions and the power X to reward you. Since all of these elements wouldn't even exist yet when humans still lived in Alterna, I think we can rule out the idea that this was some kind of human testing program that has been continuing autonomously for ages. Instead, what if there was a change of directive for O.R.C.A? Similar to how Todor was originally tasked to pass human knowledge onto the next worthy life form, but ended up pursuing other things. In other words, I believe O.R.C.A is not a simple program, but an advanced artificial intelligence just like Todor, and that it purposefully posed as a stiff program in the introduction as to not reveal its true intentions. And if that is the case, I have an idea for why O.R.C.A might have set all this up. For that, let's first look at the most confusing thing about all this, namely, what is O.R.C.A's relationship with Mr. Gris? Because there is also the possibility that O.R.C.A was manipulated by Gris throughout all this, as we know that Gris did repair and use Alterna's facilities to some extent to research the liquid crystals. I feel like this might be the most common idea, and also the reason why many seem to view O.R.C.A as some kind of antagonist, or as neutral at best. However, if O.R.C.A truly acted in Mr. Gris' interest, why would it reward you with Power X if that is the very thing you need to get rid of the ooze Gris tries to cover the world in? Why would Mr. Gris have any interest at all to have some computer perform tests on an Inkling or Octoling in the first place? Another problem is the weirdness of the final rocket sequences, where O.R.C.A takes your weapons away because they are forbidden, but then hands them right back to you after reaching the end of the level. And going to the next rocket phase, it gets even more interesting. O.R.C.A says that entry is prohibited in that area, but as you go forward, there is a literal exhibition of special weapons in front of each of the groups of enemies that lets you advance with no difficulty at all. It is almost like O.R.C.A is actually trying to help you. What if in reality, it is O.R.C.A who was playing Mr. Grizz for a fool by acting like a stiff automated system, while secretly helping you out to get the power X you need to get rid of the ooze and face Mr. Grizz? The reason O.R.C.A doesn't just hand out the power X to you right away might be because it wants to test your capabilities or train you before letting you straight to the rocket, but maybe also to not raise suspicion from Mr. Grizz, who is supposed to believe that this testing stuff is just some automated program from O.R.C.A he'd not be able to stop anyways. O.R.C.A pretends to handle security around the rocket for Mr. Grizz, while inconspicuously helping you proceed by quickly returning your weapons it first took away, making sure there's a conveniently placed vent to go forward, and giving you a ton of specials to deal with enemies. Assuming that O.R.C.A really set all this up with the goal of helping you defeat Mr. Grizz, it would still leave us wondering though how O.R.C.A is even knowledgeable of all the stuff happening on the surface in Inkling society, for it to create the Alterna logs and also know of all the ink weaponry to create its own test chambers based on that. For this, let's go back to the very beginning. In our very first confrontation with O.R.C.A, we can hear this noise. Curiously, for some reason, the activation sequence was paired with the fax machine noise we hear during Splatfest announcements. I'm pretty sure that the devs did not randomly choose this sound effect for this occasion, so we can assume that O.R.C.A must have some connection to the fax machine. Maybe this connection allowed O.R.C.A to receive information from the surface world, but also it may even have had an influence on the Splatfest themes that were revealed to the Inklings. The Chaos vs. Order Splatfest may have been a deliberate theme sent by O.R.C.A that was supposed to reignite interest in the Splatlands area. In other words, since Mr. Grizz must have been working on this plan at least since the beginning of Splatoon 2, O.R.C.A may have observed these developments and prepared test chambers and power X for future Agent 3 to then push the Chaos vs. Order theme to the fax machine to get the youth interested in the Splatlands again, which subsequently led to the new Squidbig Splatoon surveying the area and discovering Alterna, ultimately resulting in our hero arriving to be tested by O.R.C.A whether or not they may be suitable to defeat Mr. Grizz. And there's one more, potentially huge thing that could support this idea. The fax machine, in the religion of Inklings, is revered as a kind of deity that is referred to as the voice from on high, as it relays the themes Inklings use to hold Splatfests. With this machine, we already know that it is simply a relic from humanity. However, since Splatoon 2, new references to religion in this world have been made with the Book of Madai and the 3 lights that consumed disaster in Splatoon 3. Only this time, we first see that the magical events referred to in these texts actually exist in the real world, as the light shafts from the clouds during Big Run were actually visible, and the so-called marine life energy that reached into space to transform Little Buddy did have similarities to the 3 lights mentioned in the Sunken Scrolls. Now take a look at this. I didn't think too hard about this sequence when I first saw it, but in this context, O.R.C.A making this light appear from above with this heavenly sound effect does become really interesting when you realize that most of the magical stuff happening here is tied to some appearance of light. Maybe O.R.C.A is the fax machine, and not only that, it could possess actual godly powers that are responsible for all the seemingly magical stuff that seems to happen in the Splatlands. The 3 lights that consumed the disaster, as the second Sunken Scroll explained, coincidentally appear just above the crater where the entrance to Alterna lies, which could mean that O.R.C.A simply opened the chute to drain the water of the flood, while the lights may be an attempt by O.R.C.A to conceal its true identity, or rather, to not make people question the event by staging it as a divine incident. Similarly, the marine life energy in the story finale seems to be the same thing as the 3 lights from before, as the dialogue during that scene even directly mentions it. So this energy that transformed Little Buddy and ultimately made it even possible for us to defeat Grizz may also have been the influence of O.R.C.A. As for why the AI cares about the current civilization to that extent in the first place, maybe it's the fact that Inklings, Octolings, etc. all originated in O.R.C.A. Or at least the populations around the Splatlands did. Even though they now live on the surface, O.R.C.A. might recognize them as part of O.R.C.A. still, and thus wants to keep them safe. Maybe it is even sadness from the loss of its creators that has driven O.R.C.A. to try and prevent such a disaster from happening again. In light of this continuous destruction humans have caused, O.R.C.A.'s new directive it has given itself may be to act as a protector of the mollusk era from the old human era. Both of the world-threatening events in the past games were consequences of human actions pre-O.R.C.A. Mr. Grizz, or Bear Number 3 in this case, who was sent to space on the Ark Polaris by the Old World humans, and Tartar, who was created by the Professor in an attempt to preserve and pass on human knowledge before the Old World collapsed. With this, O.R.C.A.'s reach may even go beyond the events of Splatoon 3, and perhaps the unknown identity that pulled Cuttlefish and Agents 3 and 8 into the Deep-Sea Metro was related to O.R.C.A. all along, with the intention of making them confront Tartar on purpose to defeat it. In this sense, O.R.C.A. and O.R.C.A. could be seen as an intermediary between the old world of humanity and the present world of evolved sea life in the mollusk era. And in reality, everything O.R.C.A. did was actually in an interest to protect the world from another destructive interference from late humanity's failed projects.